A few days ago, I logged into my YouTube studio to see a message that read, "Keep YouTube yours. Proposed UK rules could impact your channel's views. Have your say." I thought to myself, how strange. Perhaps it's to do with the new social media ban for children in the UK. Maybe it's even about AI. But it seems while we've been thinking about those things, the UK government have quietly published a document that could change how we discover content online forever. I spent a Sunday afternoon reading through this document, so you don't have to. And if by the end of this video you feel as strongly about this as I do, well, don't fear, because there is potentially something that we can do. So make sure you stick around till the end for that. But first, some context. Let's go back to 1922.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at the Alexander Palace. And now we're going to see and hear someone you know well.
Lukewarm.
The British Broadcasting Company began life in 1922 as a private company manufacturing radios. 6 years later, in 1927, the government realised how influential broadcast media could be, and they decided to grant the BBC a royal charter to run a monopoly funded by a compulsory licence fee, which is how the BBC still get funded today. John Reith, the first managing director at the BBC, dictated that a monopoly was necessary to uphold high cultural and ethical standards across the nation, something that is very topical in this paper today. During World War II, the BBC was integral for the British government in spreading reliable information about the war and also boosting morale for millions of Britons. Post-war, the public desired alternative content, so Conservative MPs, led by Winston Churchill, argued that ending a state-run monopoly was a matter of free speech and consumer choice. The Labour Party would strongly oppose this and mounted a vigorous campaign against the Conservatives. They felt that introducing advertising would degrade broadcasting and force channels to chase ratings rather than educating and informing the public. Despite this pushback, in 1954, Parliament passed the Television Act, giving birth to ITV, who were the first commercial ad-funded TV station in the UK. It wasn't until nearly 20 years later that the BBC's monopoly on radio would come to an end, when independent radio stations first started to appear in 1973. In 1982, Channel 4 was born, and in 1997, Channel 5 was born, further slicing the TV audience share. It's kind of unbelievable to think that in 97, there was only 5 TV channels. You had BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, Channel 4, and Channel 5. And this was literally it for consumers to basically be watching visual media on television sets. Over the years, the BBC and the government have been involved in their fair share of controversies. While the BBC claimed to be completely unbiased and independent, a number of incidents over the years would suggest that the BBC could be a propaganda arm for the government. I mean, I'm not saying that. I just said it, but I'm saying that some people would say that. Maybe a less controversial way of saying that would be successive governments from all different political parties have seen value in the BBC, and they see it as a national institution worth preserving. And yeah, we see that in this document that we're about to talk about today. In the 2000s, the BBC were fairly quick to transition into the digital age when they launched iPlayer, dominating the market for on-demand viewing at the time. And then over the 2010s, we saw the introduction of US streaming giants such as Netflix, which would, enter the picture. Even YouTube, the service that you're watching my face on today, further taking a slice of that audience from the BBC. Fast forwarding to today, the TV audiences are declining. That is no secret. In 2019, 88% of the UK reported to watching broadcast TV. Just 5 years later, that number went down to 74%. Most notably, though, just 45% of young adults between 16 and 24 reported watching TV at all in 2024. And out of all the content that age group consumes, just 19% of it was from traditional broadcasters. Quite incredibly, in the UK, YouTube accounts for 14% of the total viewing share across all platforms and broadcasters. That's only 3% behind the Beeb, and it absolutely wipes out other traditional broadcasters. And that's not just for that age group, that's all together, that's all viewers. So that's quite incredible how far we've come since 97, when there was only 5 options. But the biggest concern for the government that they will keep bringing up in this document is news media. They say that TV, being a news source for people, is actually down more than 30% in 10 years, and social media news consumption is up by 20% in 10 years. This has obviously caused alarm bells to ring for those traditional media players. And according to this government document, they're concerned that people aren't gathering around the TV together anymore. They say that we're being isolated by our algorithms and our devices, and it encourages diverse and inaccurate narratives. Before we properly dive into this, I do want to point out that I do actually think that we have an issue with the media landscape of today's day and age, just kind of really in general, both how content is being consumed and the type of content being consumed. I don't think it's controversial to say that we are treading new ground as a society in the media landscape, and children in this day and age, between the AI slop and the slot machine algorithms that social media companies feed them, their minds are just being melted by content, which is why when the UK announced a ban for social media for children under 16, I can at least understand why they're doing it. I don't necessarily agree with a complete blanket ban and just totally removing the problem, but I can at least appreciate that they're trying to do something to help that situation. But this document today, this proposal is just different. I have some massive problems with government overreach here, which we're about to get to. I want to start with a quote from the opening statement here, just to kind of set the tone. It says, "This work will ensure that our media continues to play its vital and important roles in entertaining, educating, serving democracy, and supporting social cohesion in the UK." Now, I don't know if I'm just straight up misinterpreting this, but media serving democracy and supporting social cohesion just like straight up sounds like I'm personally for free speech, and I think media should be able to report on whatever they want despite having government approval on how it serves democracy and supports social cohesion. Let's take the recent story that Rupert Lowe and Restore UK are looking into, and whatever you think about their politics, he's been investigating a gang of people that have committed the most heinous crimes. And it seems like these legacy media organizations simply weren't reporting on these at a wide scale in fear of creating social unrest and divide and friction between communities. I hope you can read between the lines and you know what I'm talking about. I'm hesitant to say it out loud because of getting demonetized or whatever, which I guess is a whole other issue for a whole other day. But this is a real world example of what can happen if we block out, independent creators in favor of legacy media. The paper also constantly brings up algorithms. They say global technology platforms now often control the algorithms that decide what content people see. I mean, that is factually true. The more interesting question would be what follows if the government take control of these algorithms. Are they arguing that because platforms decide visibility, the government may be justified to take control and prop up legacy media? I mean, they say here, we will explore legislative options to require social media to make content from PSM providers, that's public service media providers, and potentially also national and local news publishers, prominent and easily discoverable. So the government are going to start influencing algorithms. You're replacing one gatekeeper with another, and the new gatekeeper will be the state. Is that really better? They go on to say, we'll be ensuring the prominence of trustworthy sources of news and information on the biggest social media platforms is particularly crucial in ensuring resilience during periods of community tension, social unrest, and dramatic events. The government argues that during riots and emergencies, authoritative information should be easier to find. Maybe, but also what if they start hiding information from individuals or muting concerns that the public have around the government, that people want to protest on social media and maybe organize in-person protests through social media? What if the government just decide now they control the algorithms, they're going to shut that down? And also this brings up another question. Who decides what trustworthy news source is? They keep mentioning here trustworthy sources of news. Who decides what that is? Are they just assuming that these legacy organizations are the only news sources that can be trusted? Could the governments eventually decide what information people are seeing during politically sensitive events? This to me doesn't sound sensible. It really doesn't sound great. As a creator, for me, this obviously raises huge concerns. Let's imagine there's two documentaries on the same subject. At the moment, YouTube's algorithm basically works out which one is better. Which one do people want to watch more? Based on the thumbnail and the title, who's clicking on each one more often? And how good is it? How many people are actually staying to watch more of that documentary? At the moment, that process is fair, and whatever one gets more clicks and people decide to watch for longer would get pushed by YouTube's algorithm more, allowing creators like me and other individual creators to compete against these media giants such as the BBC. This is capitalistic. This is the American dream. This is the definition of a free market. And I think it's great that little creators that are just me with a microphone and a camera by myself can compete against the BBC with millions of dollars and production crews of 20 people out making documentaries. I'm not saying I am competing with them. I'm nowhere near on their level, but I have the chance at the moment. But from reading between these lines here, the government want to take that away? What if this legislation requires platforms to prioritize one over the other, the legacy media over the independent? That BBC documentary is going to get pushed more because the government just deem it to be a legacy organization. So what, I'm penalized for not being an 100-year-old organization with millions of dollars in the bank? It's unfair. If we just zoom out for a moment as well and actually talk about the bigger trend here, a lot of the stats I spoke about at the top of this video clearly show the changing media landscape. I mean, times change, industries adapt, and big players die. That's something not just true of media. Take people that used to breed horses or donkeys for farmers, for example. They were probably gutted when the tractor was invented, because farmers are going to get tractors over keep using horses and donkeys because a tractor is more reliable. A tractor doesn't need rest. The examples are actually endless. If you're a similar age to me, you might remember going to a Blockbuster Video on a weekend to go pick out a film to watch with your mum and dad. Well, now you just have Netflix. People younger than me will just take this for granted. You turn your TV on and you have a library of thousands of movies to pick from. Blockbuster Video died because streaming services offer a better product. Film being replaced by digital cameras, and now even maybe smartphones replacing digital cameras. Maps. Everyone used to have a map in their car. Why would you need a map now when everyone has a smartphone and you have a free app on your phone that can literally do all the navigating for you? You don't even know how to read a map. You can just tell it where you want it to go and it will send you on your way. Typewriters being replaced by PCs, vinyl being replaced by CDs, and now CDs being replaced by music streaming services. Ultimately, in all these examples, it's the consumer that decides how these industries move on. People always want something that's better, more convenient, and being delivered at a higher quality a lot of the time. I think it's not controversial to say many independent documentaries from YouTube are going to be way better than stuff that you can watch that's produced by the BBC. And I do just want to point out as well, many of those industries I've just mentioned aren't completely dead. I mean, I have a whole collection of vinyl records to my right here. And I also have a Spotify subscription. These industries adapt, they change. And I mean, I don't have all the answers, but perhaps this is what these legacy media organizations have to take into account. The landscape's changing because of the consumer. The consumer demands something different and better quality content. The government just can't put steps into place to help these legacy organizations survive when that's not necessarily what the consumer wants. The reality is traditional media is losing influence and YouTube is taking over television. People now listen to podcasts instead of radio. Many would rather get their news from independent journalists on platforms like Patreon and Substack than from politically captured organizations run by billionaires. For the government to reject this free market change really does make me wonder, is this really about television or is it who controls information in the internet age? This green paper does bring up some serious concerns. One that I can really emphasize with is what will happen to local journalism, who will cover local corruption, who will report on local court cases or local election reports. With the algorithm feed we see today, I think that the feeds favor sensationalized stories that are going to reach the most eyes as possible. Local news doesn't necessarily fall into that category to be optimized for an algorithm. But it's still important that someone is doing local work and reporting on these, local news stories. I don't have answers, but again, maybe like these industries I've just mentioned, legacy organizations have to adapt. Maybe they can focus on local stuff. Let the independent YouTuber take the big stories. Come on. As I promised, there is actually something we can potentially do, and we can have our say to try and stop this. As this is a green paper, it's basically like a government proposal before it becomes a white paper and then goes through Parliament and they vote these things into laws. Well, at this stage, the green paper stage, they allow members of the public to have their say, and we can do exactly that. You'll find a link in the description where you can have your say, but I really encourage you to do so, even if the questions are kind of ridiculous. In section 2, they ask a question about the government giving prominence to trustworthy news providers. They ask if these special prominence privileges should be given to trustworthy providers all the time or just during periods of heightened vulnerability. There is no option to choose no. There is no option to choose I reject this statement. They shouldn't get any preference at all. They simply give you these two options, or you can say, well, I don't know. And I do worry that Parliament they'll take this to Parliament and they'll say, oh, look, we asked members of the public and no one actually opposes this. People are just not sure, or they think we should only use it during times of crisis, or we should use it all the time. This is a classic case of manipulating data. But there is plenty of space later on in the survey to give your own responses, and you can really get across how outrageous you think this proposal is. So once again, if you do care about independent creators like myself, then I really do encourage you to get online, take this survey, and tell the UK government what you think of this proposal.